good evening or good morning or wherever you are in the time. We're tremendously honored to have Professor Gary Rendsburg talk to us. Professor Rendsburg holds the chair of Jewish history in the Department of Jewish Studies at Rutgers University in the States, and he is an immensely important scholar on all aspects of the Hebrew Bible, which he examines holistically in connection with the surrounding cultures of the ancient Israelites. And I strongly recommend that you go to his website. Not only can you see the titles of numerous books and huge numbers of articles, but you can also see the digital humanities projects that he's cooperated on, contributed to, and you can actually click buttons and for yourself see wonderful material from the Genizah and also the Dead Sea Scrolls. Anyway, as we have just entered the start of Holy Week, and we have the Passover Seder on Wednesday evening, it's just the most wonderful opportunity to hear a lecture, a talk on the Passover Haggadah through the ages, Jewish text, Christian surprises. So I'm delighted to hand over to you, Gary, and do start us off.
And thank you so much, Anna. It's so good to see my friends and colleagues between Oxford, Cambridge, and Washington, D.C. So thank you all for joining us, those of you who are coming from various parts around the globe. The wonder of Zoom, which continues to be the great 21st century wonder, which allows us all to be together on what is right now a Monday afternoon here in New Jersey, Eastern United States. The Passover Haggadah through the ages, Jewish text, everybody knows that. We'll go back to the origins of the Haggadah in just a moment, and then Christian surprises, which you will see as our talk unfolds. First of all, let's discuss the origins of the Haggadah. First of all, what does the word itself mean? The Hebrew word Haggadah means telling or narration. This is a foundational text of Judaism that you see right in front of you, the Mishnah. It is written circa 200 CE, about 130 years after the destruction of the temple, by the earliest generations of the rabbis from the first few centuries CE. And one of their goals in the Mishnah was to create a code of Jewish law and ritual which would allow Jews to live in a post-temple world. Let's go back and state the obvious, that in biblical times, Judaism, the religion of ancient Israel, early Judaism, was temple-centered. There was a priesthood. You worshiped God in the temple in Jerusalem. When the Second Temple was destroyed in the year 70, all manner of new rituals began to develop, some of which, by the way, already existed while the temple was standing. We should make that point very, very clear. But they get codified in the Mishnah in the tractate called Psachim, which is to say Passover. You have the basic outline towards the end of that tractate in chapter 10 of the Haggadah text. The rabbis ordain what a family should do at its Passover meal at home. And it becomes very much a home-based ritual. I, for one, believe that it probably existed prior to the year 70. And in fact, of course, that opens up the question whether the Last Supper, as recorded in the Gospels, is a Passover Seder or not. Scholars continue to debate that point. I myself debate that point in my own mind, and am inclined to think that it indeed was a Passover meal, Passover Seder, but we'll leave that point where it is without any further evidence in either direction on how to demonstrate the point. So the Mishnah lays out for us what one is supposed to do, the cups of wine that one is to drink, the various blessings that one is to recite. And it also includes here, by the way, this manuscript comes from medieval Italy. The manuscript is circa 1100 CE, as you see in the text box to the left, now in Budapest as part of the Kaufmann collection. And one of the things that the Mishnah does is describe how one is supposed to narrate, including involving others at the meal, children, etc. And one is to ask questions, because how can you have a meal and a conversation and so on without questions? And the basic question is, how is this night different from all other nights? If you can read Hebrew, you see that in the first line there. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot. And then it goes on to say that there are these three questions that one should consider. And that is, why do we dip foods, different foods, twice? Why do we eat matzah? And why do we eat roasted meat? And those are there listed for you with the 3 bullet points: dipping, matzah, and roasting. If you're familiar with the Jewish tradition of today, and in fact for the last 1,000 years, of reciting 4 questions, hold on, you'll see how we get there. But the base text, going back to the Mishnah in 200 CE, is these 3 questions. And if you look at other manuscripts of the Mishnah, this one is also from Italy in the 11th century, although it has remained in Italy down to the present day. It's in the Biblioteca Palatina in Parma, the same 3 questions. And this one, just a mile or 2 probably from where Anna Abulafia is seated right now, is in the Cambridge University Library. It's a later manuscript from the 15th century, but again, you have the same 3 questions. Again, if you can read Hebrew, you've got the Shebachol Halelot questions there. Apologies. Oops, here we go. And here's 1 question, here's 2 questions, and this may look like separate questions here, but no, that's the 3rd question, beginning of it, split across the 2 lines. So those are our Mishnah manuscripts. Those are complete manuscripts. If we look into the Cairo Genizah material, this is also in the Cambridge University Library, part of the Taylor Schechter collection, we have other Mishnah manuscripts with the same 3 questions and more of the same. Eventually, we have Haggadah manuscripts. In other words, the text that is embedded in the Mishnah is extracted by Jewish scribes and Jewish families for home use. Only the rabbis and the educated presumably studied Mishnah, but everybody is going to do a Passover Seder on the eve of Passover, such as this coming Wednesday evening. And so we begin to get actually home guides, home haggadot, for home ritual use. And this is the oldest example that we have. It's also from the Cairo Genizah, but this one's not in Cambridge. This one is in Philadelphia as part of the Dropsy University of Pennsylvania collection. And again, if you can read Hebrew, I invite you to follow my cursor here, Kiddush Pesach, the sanctification over the wine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam borei peri hagefen. If you can read Hebrew, you can actually see that this is the same words that are recited today, 1,200, 1,100 plus years after this manuscript was written. Now, when I show these in class, I always like to show this to my students, and I invite people to say, what do you notice about a manuscript like this? And I especially don't want the students who know how to read Hebrew to answer this question, but actually anybody can answer this question. And the first thing that should come to mind is that this is not written by a professional scribe. If we go back a few and look at this, okay, this one to be sure, and the earlier ones that I showed you, these are written by professional scribes. But this seems to have been written by the head of household. He's not a scribe. He borrowed a copy, he wrote it out, and it is used for the home with only one person holding a copy. Today, in the age of printing, if you're hosting a Seder, or if you've been to a Seder, whether you're Jewish or Christian or other, you know that almost everybody at the table has a copy, and you can just follow along. That wasn't the case before the age of printing. A family would have one copy. If they were fortunate, probably had one copy, and head of household would have read the text. And so this is what you're looking at here, a very, if I can use the word, even primitive handwriting. But here is the Manuscripts, the 3 questions. And again, it is 3 questions, exactly like we saw in the Mishnah as part of the original text. We have another manuscript of the Haggadah from around the same time period, which is at the JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary Library in New York. And once again, you can just see that this is not a professional scribe, somebody doing his best simply to write out the text. And here is the color photographs. The black and white photographs are sometimes even easier to read. So give you a sense of these early Haggadah texts. Now, the so-called 4 questions, to repeat, 3 questions in our Mishnah manuscripts, which are then continued in our oldest copy, the pen dropsy Haggadah. The one I just showed you at JTS in New York actually only has 2 questions, dipping and roasting. The matzah one is either not there due to a mistake, or it was so obvious he didn't want to waste ink, and he would know how to ask those questions, to ask that particular question. Now, eventually we get haggadot, such as the one you see in front of you, also from the Cairo Genizah, now in Cambridge, with 4 questions. But that's because these Haggadah texts are reflecting the Babylonian rite, the Jewish community of the diaspora living in the East in Babylonia. Although Babylonian Jewry had spread throughout the Middle East, including to Egypt as well, which is why this winds up in the Cairo Genizah. And you now have 4 questions. The dipping and the matzah remain. The roasting one has gone. And now you have a question about bitter herbs and about reclining. And I'll say something about reclining in particular. Here is another one from the Cairo Genizah with 4 questions, just giving you a sense of what our manuscript tradition looks like. So you have either a land of Israel tradition going back to the Mishnah written in Israel with 3 questions, or you have a Babylonian tradition in the diaspora with 4 questions. Now, why did the roasting one get removed? Because the tradition in Babylonia was not to eat roasted meat. The Torah ordains that one should eat roasted meat, and apparently the people of the land of Israel continued to do that. But in the diaspora, the tradition arose not to eat roasted meat because that should be reserved for the time when the temple's standing, and so Jews did not necessarily eat roasted meat. They continued to eat bitter herbs, which are referred to also in the Torah. But notice that reclining question. What is that about? Now, if you've been to a Passover Seder, you know that in the instructions, there's no real written words about this, but within the instructions, or the tradition is to have a pillow at your side and to recline. The people in the land of Israel did not need to ask that question because it wasn't specific to Passover. It was something they did at every meal going back to their heritage as part of the Roman Empire. Romans, as you probably know, had benches of this sort. This is known as the triclinium, 3 benches, triclinium, 3 things on which you recline, hence the word triclinium, a reconstruction from Pompeii. And so Jews would typically have been celebrating any meal in a Roman fashion within the Roman Empire, such as in Israel, and they would have reclined at their meal. Probably they did it on every festival meal, probably every Sabbath meal. There was no need to ask a specific question about that. And here is an artistic reconstruction of what Roman triclinium dining would have looked like. I've never figured out how one does this for the digestive tract and all that, but okay, we'll leave that for another time. So those Jews in Babylonia who were living outside the Roman Empire had no tradition about reclining, except they adopted it for Passover, and therefore they had to ask, why do we recline on Passover? This is all very complicated. I hope you're enjoying this early history of the Haggadah. And now my favorite of all the texts, also at the Cambridge University Library, what's unique about this Passover Haggadah text? 5 questions. That's right. Okay. In other words, these Jews apparently, or the author of this text, clearly a professional scribe, you see how beautifully it's written, couldn't decide between 3 or 4 questions. So he took the overlap, the 2 from the left-hand column, or the 3 from the left-hand column, and the 2 additional ones from the right-hand column, and created a single text with 5 instances of Shebachol Halelot. On all other nights we do this, but on this night we do that. And here comes a little bit of Gary humor. You know those people whose Seder goes on to 2 o'clock in the morning? They must be reciting something like this with the extra line in there, right? So this is the textual fluidity of Jewish tradition, where everybody has a different text. And that would be true, by the way, of every text, not only in the Jewish tradition, but in Christian, Muslim, you name it, tradition before the age of printing, when printing creates a more uniform text, because you can have hundreds of copies of the same book. Prior to printing, you have Obviously, every copy is unique. Okay, so we're going to leave it right there and move on to what is the most remarkable aspect of the history of the Haggadah, and that is these beautifully illuminated haggadot, singular Haggadah, plural haggadot, manuscripts from the Middle Ages. The text is going to remain essentially the same. All of the texts I showed you have no artwork. They were created mainly in the Islamic world, or they're quite early, like our Mishnah manuscripts from Italy. But the tradition arose for the Jews of Christian Europe to illuminate their manuscripts, their prayer books, their Passover texts, and so on, their Bibles. And this is obviously a Christian influence on Jewish scribal tradition. And if you could afford a manuscript like this, as many wealthy individuals could, you had one produced for you in a workshop of scribes and artists. These are all written on parchment, by the way, and they are absolutely beautiful. And we today in the 21st century are heirs to and the curators of these wonderful medieval productions. This is among the oldest, if not the oldest of them, the Prado Haggadah at the JTS Library in New York, written in Spain around 1300 in the heyday of the High Middle Ages. And this is one of the opening pages, Halach Ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction, with the Hey Aleph, the Hebrew word, or the Aramaic word actually, in this case, Ha, this, in that rectangular box with the gilding, and so on. An absolutely beautiful production. More of that manuscript. Here's the beginning of the Manishtana, by this point with the 4 questions that we were discussing in place. Now, what makes this manuscript so important and so unique? Before we get to that, one more image. One of the aspects of the Passover Haggadah are the 4 sons. In our egalitarian world today, it's perfectly fine to refer to them as the 4 children, but in medieval times and up until modernity, of course, it's the 4 sons. The wise one, the wicked one, the simple one, and the one who does not know how to ask. In these medieval Haggadot, the wicked, the illuminated ones, the wicked son is often portrayed as a soldier. And the soldiers you see here with the sword and so on would be in imitation of, although this is supposedly a Jewish child, he's the wicked child, but he looks like the soldier of the Christian army. And we'll see other examples of that, not this particular one as we proceed. You'll see somehow how this is evoked in the artwork. Now, what makes the Prado Haggadah so remarkable? And again, if we were in a classroom together or in a lecture hall together, I would now ask for the audience participation portion. What do you see on these pages, which you haven't seen on the prior pages? And the answer is, hopefully everybody will realize this quite immediately, is that the artwork was not completed. In fact, if you look at this, the Hebrew text was written out by the scribe completely, and he left space, and then he probably hands off page by page to the artist. And the artist is supposed to complete the task of illuminating this manuscript. The Prado Haggadah is important, A, because of the artwork and so on, but B, because it shows us how a Haggadah was produced because it was never completed. This is quite remarkable. In fact, I look at this right-hand image here and I say to myself, wait a minute, the artist colored in 3 of the Hebrew letters of that 6-letter word. And then what did he do? He took a lunch break in the middle of that letter, middle of that word, and then never returned to his workshop, to his atelier. I mean, it is remarkable that this is the spot in the middle of a word of RT, and I will pass through the land of Egypt, etc., that he decided to take a break and never return to it. So this is a very important aspect of not the Haggadah per se, but manuscript production, because it shows us what you see here. In fact, 2/3 of the manuscript are not completed. Out of the almost 90 pages, 30 pages are complete, and 58 pages were never finished. So the Hebrew text is there, but the artwork is drawn, as you see, but never colored in. Now, every manuscript of the Middle Ages that we have in our libraries today has three stories to tell. One, when and where was it composed, for whom, by whom? The date, the place, the name of the scribe, the name of the benefactor. And if we have a colophon, which gives us all of that information, we are always very, very happy. If we don't have a complete colophon, we can use other techniques to date approximately when it was written. We can almost always tell where it was written based on the layout and the handwriting and so on. So we know this is written in Spain around the year 1300, but the colophon, which you see right here, informs us simply that the Haggadah text has been completed without any additional information, except the scribe then adds, "May there be praise to the eternal God." So where was it after the year 1300 in Spain? The second story that a manuscript has to tell is where has it been for, in this case, let's say 600 or 700 now years before it reached the library in which it is today. So the second story is the history of the manuscript. How did it travel from Spain to wherever it went? And how did it eventually get to New York? That's the third story. Where is it today? Who are the devoted librarians who are the curators and custodians of these remarkable texts? Now, in this case, we get a clue here at the bottom with a date, 1617. I know it's very hard to read, but here's the date. In Latin, by an Italian church censor, Giovanni Domenico Caretto, which is to say, this manuscript is in Italy in the year 1617. So we know that the Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492, and many of them went to Italy, to places like Livorno and Rome and other parts of the Italian peninsula. And almost undoubtedly, this manuscript made that journey with one such Jewish family, and there it is in 1617. During the 16th and 17th centuries, sidebar comment, the church engages in Italy, especially in a practice of reviewing Hebrew manuscripts, Jewish manuscripts, and the censor would sign it to say there's nothing in this text which is an affront to Christianity. It's approved. And so this is what you have here by, in this case, Giovanni Domenico Caretto. Where's the rest of the story? 300 plus years pass, and the Prado Haggadah is in Rome in 1928 when it's purchased by a private collector. That individual donated it to the Prado family. Somehow, after World War II, it was still in the hands of the Prado family, who sold it to JTS in 1964. That's why it's called the Prado Haggadah. So we review what I've just said, right? 3 narratives for every manuscript. How it was composed, when, where, why, for whom. Where has it been for the hundreds of years? 600-700 years frequently, sometimes 1,000 years. And where is it today and how did it get there? So fascinating journey in the world of manuscripts, which of course is part of this program and this theme of the Oxford Interfaith Forum. Okay, let's move on to a second manuscript, which is probably the most famous of all of them because of its unique artwork. And we move from Spain to Germany, same time period, around the year 1300. And this is called the Bird's Head Haggadah. Again, the Hebrew text is basically the same. Even before the age of printing, there's more or less a unified Jewish text, slightly different from one manuscript to another, but nothing majorly different. This is in the Israel Museum. Look at the artwork on the bottom, and I will zoom in on it for you in just a second. You see here Jewish individuals preparing matzah for Passover on the right, preparing it, on the left, putting it into the oven, and they are portrayed with birds' heads. And matzah today always has had these little pricks in it, so you have a little pricker tool there. And the Jewish men are portrayed with the Judenhut, the Jewish hat that Jews in medieval Ashkenaz in particular were required to wear. The younger individuals, like the one on the right, children do not have to wear the hat. And the woman is wearing a snood, which remains to this day a good part of Jewish practice, especially in Orthodox circles. So here you have a portrayal of the medieval Jewish family in Germany / Ashkenaz. The only question is, what's with the birds' heads? And no one really has an answer to that question. I will leave it to others, including my colleague Mark Epstein of Vassar College here in the US, who's written on this, and by the way, whose book on the medieval Haggadah is highly recommended. He has an entire section on the bird's head Haggadah and the others that I will show you. So it's just a curiosity which we all admire and love. And then on the left, you see they are putting the matzah into the oven, and nothing's changed, right? It's a brick oven. It looks like a pizza shovel. You see the broom with the ashes on it at the bottom there to clean out the oven. And now I have to hold up a little piece of modern art. How's this? Everybody should have one of these hanging in their house. Thank you to my student, Peter Shama, my former student at Rutgers University, now living in Jerusalem, who's an artist. He was a double major in art history and Jewish studies. What a great combination. And produced for my wife and myself this little beautiful piece of art based on the bird's head Haggadah, and it hangs lovingly in our house with a big word, shalom, may there be peace in our house. So just to show you how you can sort of evoke these down to the present day. And here are Pharaoh's soldiers on the right, chasing the Israelites who are making their dough and putting it on their shoulders and leaving Egypt. Okay, let's zoom in on this from the bird's head Haggadah. First of all, the Egyptians look, first of all, very medieval. We'll come back to that. But secondly, they have blank faces. Again, a curiosity. But what's interesting here is that two of these individuals, these two right here, have birds' heads. They therefore must be Jews. Why would they be part of the Egyptian army? This was elucidated not by Mark Epstein, the great scholar, but rather by his 10-year-old child. I'm not joking. He gives credit to, in the book, to his 10-year-old son, who said, oh, that must be Dathan and Abiram, Datan and Abiram, who, according to the Midrash, they are mentioned in the book of Numbers as the two individuals who lead the murmurings against Moses. The Midrashic tradition in post-biblical times goes so far as to say that these two individuals went over to the Egyptian side and joined the Egyptian army. That's how anti-Moses they were. And so this is now embedded in this manuscript art, which you wouldn't know unless you had there's no labels here, unless you had an entire exegetical tradition about which you were aware. As I said, the Egyptians are looking awfully medieval there, and notice the banner on the left and the shield on the right with the eagle. Where does that come from? Well, that is the symbol of the Holy Roman Empire, right? So here are the Jews of medieval Germany living within the Holy Roman Empire. And when they need to portray the Egyptians, what do they know about ancient Egyptians? They obviously portray them as their medieval counterparts, which is to say the ruling army of the day, the army of the Holy Roman Empire, with the logo, motto, emblem, symbol that you see here. I love this material, absolutely fascinating. And again, the people of Israel going off with their sacks of dough on their shoulders. They didn't have time to bake the matzah, as the book of Exodus chapter 12 narrates. Now look at this page. This is the page which shows you the manna and the quail. This is part of the Dayenu song. If God had done such and such, it would have been enough for us. Dayenu. On and on and on it goes for verse after verse. And then it says here at the bottom of this page, folio 22, verso, if God had only supplied us with the manna, that would have been enough as well. And so the artist includes manna here. Now the artist has never seen manna, but look at the manna, look at the divine hands coming out of the sky, and look at the manna, especially the two large versions still being held there. Boy, they are looking awfully Eucharistic, aren't they? In other words, these are the wafers. Think about obviously the Eucharist happens every Sunday, but look at the calendar reckoning of Passover and Easter so close to each other year after year, including this year. And, you know, you have the wafers that are being used here to indicate the manna. That is one of our Christian surprises, right? And the Jewish men are out there collecting the manna. Now, although it doesn't refer to the quail in the text, the artwork gives us also the quail coming from heaven. I think this is part of the story in the book of Numbers. God supplies not only manna, but also the quail. Now, the artist would have seen quail because European quail are quite common. They're all over the place in Europe and the Mediterranean, not just the Middle East. So he knew what a quail looked like, but when he showed a quail, and he has one here underneath the two large, what I will call wafers for the moment, look at the image of that quail, and this I owe to Mark Epstein again. This is not a quail, this is a dove, right? You look at Christian art of the same medieval period, and the dove represents the Holy Spirit. Here is a manuscript written in Oxford in the Middle Ages. Shout out to Taya and everybody else in Oxford with us today. And you see the image of the dove, the Holy Spirit. Look at the Jewish version, look at the Christian version, look at them side by side with my circles over them. The point here is that the Jews, when they learned to draw and illuminate their manuscripts, they had as their model the Christian manuscripts next door to them, which is to say, Prado Haggadah, Bird's Head Haggadah, the others I will show you. The scribes and illuminators, Jewish and Christian, worked in the same workshops, side by side. They went to the same parchment makers. They obtained their ink from the same people. They obtained the colors they needed for the artwork from the same people, their cutting tools, their pens, everything they needed, whether you were Jewish or Christian, you went to the same place to obtain them, and they frequently would have been working side by side in these scribal and artistic workshops. That explains why there's so much overlay between the Christian material and the Jewish material, and we've only begun to see that as we proceed through our lecture today. There is no real colophon for our text, but the scribe does include or embed his name here in this one word, munachim, which means that the items of the matzah and the maror, the unleavened bread and the bitter herbs, are to be placed. And the Hebrew word there is munachim, and he illuminates for us the mem, the nun, the chet, and the mem, the final mem, to give us his name, Menachem. Okay, that was the name of our scribe. And I love the way he does these little flourishes here, blown up for you here in color, to give us a sense of what his name would have been. And we actually know this scribe from another manuscript known as the Leipzig Machzor, a festival prayer book. So I hope you're all enjoying our journey through these remarkable manuscripts. What's the history of this one? The Bird's Head Haggadah, written in 1300 approximately. We don't know where it was for 600 years, other than to say it must have remained in Jewish hands in Germany, because it's still there in 1900, owned by the Benedict family, who gave it to their daughter and son-in-law on the occasion of their marriage. And it was stored by the son-in-law, Ludwig Marum, in his office down to 1933, when the Nazis take over in Germany. We don't know how it survived World War II. All we know is that it resurfaced after the war in 1946, and it was eventually sold to the Bezalel Museum in Jerusalem, the forerunner of the Israel Museum, for $600. Now, that was probably a lot of money back in the 40s and 50s, but today these manuscripts go for millions of dollars and, of course, are not for sale. And it resides ad hayom hazeh, down to the present day, in the Israel Museum, and here it is on display, permanent display in the Israel Museum, so in Jerusalem. So every manuscript has all of these incredible stories to tell as we proceed from one to another. Let's go to our next manuscript, the Golden Haggadah. I'm giving you a survey here. Do you realize one could devote a lecture, a full lecture to each of these Haggadot? I wanted to give you a little taste of all of them, of selected 5 or 6 that we're doing this afternoon / evening. This one's from northern Spain, probably Barcelona, 14th century. It's in the British Library. It's been there now for 150 plus years. And the number one thing you see in the Golden Haggadah is the opening pages. This is folio 2 verso. The opening pages show various biblical scenes with 4 to a page in this kind of a layout. And the captions at the top and the bottom in the Hebrew tell you what you're looking at. And they are not just scenes from the Exodus story, which would relate to Passover. They go back to the very beginning of the book of Genesis. And so in the upper right picture, Adam is naming the animals. In the upper left picture, Adam and Eve have now determined that they are naked and they're covering themselves with fig leaves. And on it goes, right? So this is not relevant to the Passover text, which is in the book, but it sets the stage by taking you from Genesis through Exodus with all of this kind of artwork. Now, how would a Jewish individual have conceived of writing a text like this? Well, once again, you look at Christian manuscripts. This is the famous Crusader Bible or Picture Bible, which is in the Morgan Library in New York City. It is one of the crown jewels of the entire medieval manuscript production in any religious tradition. These are scenes from the life of Moses. And so you begin to see that this relates to the other one. It gives you a sense of how these texts were written. Now, in this case, you have, because it was produced in a Christian realm, in a Christian context, you have labels in Latin, both at the top and at the bottom. And if you're looking closely at this, and you'll see it close up in a moment, on the left and right margins, you actually have Persian, and you also have right above and right below the artwork, Hebrew lettering, except it's not Hebrew, it's Judeo-Persian, it's Persian in Hebrew letters. Again, this could be an entire lecture by somebody more expert in the Crusader Bible than I am. So here you see the layout of these two. Again, we have to assume that the Jewish individual responsible for the Golden Haggadah was familiar, even though the Picture Bible is from Paris, was familiar with this Christian tradition of creating biblical scenes in such fashion. Now, if we look at a close-up of two of these scenes where they overlap, on the right is the Golden Haggadah of Moses, portrayal of Moses at Mount Sinai with the burning bush. Notice there are two Moseses there. There's Moses approaching on the right, and there's Moses removing his shoes on the left. And you have his flock of sheep, and you have the angel speaking out of the burning bush. Look at the scene from the Morgan Picture Bible, a Christian one, on the left, right? Look at the similarities. Two Moseses, one, and then he's, with his staff, and the other one he's approached further. He's got his flock of sheep. You've got the bush looking very similar. You've got the angel coming out of the bush. Jewish text, Christian surprises when you look at the Golden Haggadah. Although I don't understand how you can have a flock of sheep without a sheepdog. Moses has a sheepdog on the right. Our Christian text on the left does not. Fascinating material. Look at Moses and Aaron here. This is the Golden Haggadah. This looks so Christian, doesn't it? But this is the Golden Haggadah of Moses and Aaron before Pharaoh and two of Pharaoh's counselors. But look at Pharaoh. He doesn't look like Pharaoh as you and I know him, because of course they didn't know anything about ancient Egypt before it was rediscovered in the early modern and 19th and 20th centuries. What does the king of Egypt look like here? He looks like any other European king with his staff and the fleur-de-lis on the top of his staff. If you were to look at a contemporary text, this is also in the Morgan Library, but it's a different Bible. It's the Bible of Saint Louis. Look at the king of France on the right, and look at the king, supposedly Pharaoh of Egypt, on the left. Over and over again, our Jewish artists are evoking and invoking Christian artistic themes. Seated next to King Louis IX on the right is his mother, Blanche of Castile. Look at the way her hands are indicated. Look at the positioning of her hands and compare that right here to the hands of Pharaoh's counselor, or even Moses's hand. These are tiny little things, and again, you could spend a lifetime studying any single one of these manuscripts or two manuscripts and comparing them one to another. So there is our Golden Haggadah, more of these scenes. In this case, we're now in the Exodus account. On the bottom right, you have, on the top left, you have the Israelites leaving Egypt. On the bottom right, you have Pharaoh's army chasing the Israelites down. And then, of course, you have the bottom left there, the Egyptian army is being drowned in the Sea of Reeds. Let's focus in on that scene on the right of the Golden Haggadah. I have to keep on reminding you and reminding myself, that picture on the right is not Christian art. That is Jewish art right out of the Golden Haggadah. There it is. But of course, it's evoking, again, Christian artistic themes. It's hard to imagine that the Crusader and Christian armies all rode so closely together with all their horses and men. It sounds like these would be very dangerous to ride in such formation. But for artistic purposes, you put them all together, close one to another, to show you an army marching. So the Egyptian army is, again, not quite an Egyptian army, but rather really a medieval European army. Even the way the horses' hooves are elevated and so on, coming right out of the Christian art of the time period. Here's another example of that. By the way, in these two Christian examples, this one and this one, you'll notice that the leaders are clerics with mitres, right? So they're bishops or cardinals leading the crusades, and you see the crosses on the sides of the horses. You don't have that in the Egyptian army heading forth, but otherwise you see very similar artwork. And so that is the remarkable story of the Golden Haggadah, and a few more pages of it. If we go back to the artwork just for a moment, it is, by the way, on display in the Treasures of the British Library Gallery in London. If we go back to the artwork, or to the labels of the artwork, and why is there Persian and Judeo-Persian material on there, just to let you know that although the manuscript was in Christian Europe until the 17th century, it was a gift from the Cardinal of Krakow, Poland, to the Shah of Iran in the 17th century. It actually makes its way to Iran, this Crusader Bible. I'm sorry, I was referring to the Crusader Bible there, not the Golden Haggadah, that remained in Europe. The Crusader Bible was gifted to the Shah of Iran in the 17th century. It's the first time that there's European-Persian contact, and somebody translated the Latin into Persian, and then a Jewish person actually added Judeo-Persian material, and eventually it winds up in New York City as part of the great collection at the Morgan Library. Mr. Morgan bought it for £10,000 in 1910, and it is a jewel at the Morgan Library. If you're ever in New York, I encourage you to visit the Morgan. Okay, so that's the Golden Haggadah as you see it here on display. We could talk about the Sarajevo Haggadah as well. Probably the most famous of all of them because of its history. But I know that my colleague Alexandra Bunchik is with us from Sarajevo today, and I will leave it for her to discuss at a future lecture. She is the world's expert on this incredible text from medieval Spain, but part of the National Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina collection. And if you want to learn or read more about how these manuscripts were created, I invite you to read the lovely and delightful historical novel by Geraldine Brooks called People of the Book, about the Sarajevo Haggadah, fictional, but worthwhile reading. Hello, Alexandra. Next one I want to share with you is the Monks' Haggadah. What is that about? This is in Munich in the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek, the BSB. It was written in around 1450 in Germany. But in 1490, approximately, it entered the Tegernsee Monastery in Bavaria. And there it sat for a couple of hundred years until it eventually entered the library in Munich. What's truly remarkable about this text is that it was there was a request from the monastery for a Jewish Haggadah text, which was given to them by the Jewish community. And then Friar Erhard von Pappenheim, a great Hebraist in 15th century Germany, wrote a Latin commentary and introduction on the Haggadah. You can't make this up. Hence, we call it the Monk's Haggadah. So here are two of the pages. By the way, if you know German script, look at the very Germanic, almost looking like Fraktur script that you see here. The Jews were writing Hebrew almost like the way German Gothic is looking. And you'll notice that there are Latin glosses in the margins added by Friar Erhard, who had a full understanding of the Hebrew text. And he also wrote an entire prologue of 12 pages about what the text is all about and how it operates. So these are incredible intersections of Jewish and Christian life. And again, I'm giving you a survey. I'm not going in depth only here and there. And in this case, I just wanted to hold up the facsimile edition of David Stern of Harvard University and two colleagues, the Monk's Haggadah, an absolutely beautiful edition. You can open it up and see the pages, and it also has the full Latin text and English translation of the Latin text of Friar Erhard. These are the wonders of scholarship and how we have these incredible documents at our disposal. Everybody has a favorite. I think this has to be mine. The John Rylands Haggadah in Manchester at the John Rylands Library. Again, 14th century. We've gone back. The Monk's Haggadah I took a little bit out of order, chronological order. Beautiful, beautiful artwork. I guess I should hold it up at this point. Again, every home should have some of these. These are available. This one's in a box set. These are available in beautiful facsimile editions. Not all that expensive all the time. So these are the kinds of things that are available for purchase, and you can really study these up close and personal, although they're all available today in digital images. Thank you, Internet, which of course is how I capture these. Okay, what do we want to show you in this John Rylands Haggadah? There's a place in the Haggadah where Rabbi Elazar speaks, and it says there in the big rectangular shape, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, and it goes on to give us a quotation of Rabbi Elazar. He's one of the great rabbis mentioned all the way back in the Mishnah. And there's a portrayal of Rabbi Elazar on the right, pointing to himself, holding a text, holding a book. Look at the way he's seated. Look at his chair. Where did the Jewish illuminator, the Jewish artist, get this idea from? You know where the answer is coming already. Look at Christian art. Look at the way Christian artists understood on the left Luke, the gospel writer, or on the right a scribe, a Christian scribe. Look at the chairs they're seated in. And so when our Jewish scribe needed to show the great rabbi, he puts him in a chair and with robes and holding his book, so similar to these Christian artists, right? Their Christian art is informing these Jewish medieval Haggadah manuscripts time and again. But even greater than Rabbi Elazar is the greatest of all the rabbis of that time period, going back to the Roman period, that is, Rabban Gamliel. And Rabban is even a more glorified term than rabbi. Rabban means like our master. Rabban Gamliel is portrayed in a similar fashion, but what's the difference? He is seated in a canopied chair. Look at the canopy over his head. Where do you get this idea from? You get this also, of course, from Christian Bibles. Here is one also in the Morgan Library, a Book of Hours, medieval Christian text, prayer text, a portrayal of a scholar or a bishop seated in a canopied chair, again with the book open. And where do these canopied chairs ideas come from in the artwork? They come from the realia of the church. The bishop sits under a canopied chair. Our English word cathedral goes back to the word cathedra in Greek, which actually means chair. So the cathedral is where the bishop sits, and almost always it's under a canopy. On the left, an example from Canterbury Cathedral, one from Amiens Cathedral in the center, and the one on the right from the Basilica of Sant'Andrea della Valle in Rome, which is just a beautiful wooden structure. And I always like to show it because This is also where the first act of Tosca is set. Why Puccini decided on this church, others as opposed to on the other church in Rome, I don't know. And these are the little things you learn in Oxford Interfaith Forum lectures, okay? And that's the beautiful church of Sant'Andrea della Valle in Rome. So you look at these images here, it goes from church architecture into manuscript art of the Christians into the Jewish art that you see on the right. The Washington Haggadah. Because I am an American, I have a specific love for this particular text. Once again, I will hold up the small volume, which is the facsimile edition. Written in Italy in 1478 by the famous scribe, artist Joel ben Simeon. He did both the scribal work and the artwork. He's the most important scribe of the late 15th century, born in Germany in the Rhineland, but moves to northern Italy. This is the opening of the text. And just to show you a few items, we're not going to go through and analyze it like I've been doing with some of the others, but just the beautiful artwork that goes into the making of any of these Haggadah manuscripts. This one has a complete colophon. Well, not a complete, but it gives us the date at least, and we know it's produced where it's produced by the style. But it gives us his name, Joel ben Simeon, and it gives us a specific date, which we can date to 1478. And I put a text box there and a little box over the inside the text box, the Hebrew word vidio, or vidayo. It can be read in two ways. It means and the ink, and the work has been completed, comma, and the ink. Well, but it's also the Hebrew word which means it is sufficient, it is enough, like I've completed the task. It's a little wordplay in the colophon. Thank you, Joel ben Simeon, for your humor that allows us to smile at a distance now of almost 550 years. And here I am at the Library of Congress, and it's just one of the great places where we do our research as we travel from place to place looking at manuscripts. And no, this is my facsimile edition. That's the original, and Chaim Gottschalk was of the Library of Congress, was one who started our program today. So this gives you a sense of how we're all interconnected. Here I am holding the actual manuscript, and it's always good to look at these in human hands because you get a sense that this one's actually relatively small. I end this talk with a printed manuscript, a printed book rather. As you all know, Gutenberg invents the printing press in Mainz, Germany, middle of the 15th century. Printing spreads throughout Europe, and it changes the whole book culture because you don't now have a single copy, which a scribe could spend months writing. You now have everybody having an option to hold a copy, and my copy will look exactly like your copy, because if you have a print run, let's say of 300 or maybe eventually 1,000, we're all going to have the same copy. This one was printed in Mantua, northern Italy, in 1560. After Gutenberg invented the printing press with movable font in Latin, and of course the first book printed is the Great Gutenberg Bible, Hebrew printing presses were started, especially in northern Italy, in Venice, in Soncino, in Mantua, in Padua, in these cities of northern Italy, also Rome, Naples, etc., in the south. So Hebrew printing gets started, and we are now almost a century after Gutenberg's printing press when this is created in Mantua. The printers were almost always Christians, but they had Jewish assistants because the Christian printers knew that there was a Jewish audience for the printed book. By the way, if you read Hebrew, it says here, Po Mantova, here in Mantua, okay, where this was printed. Look at the item on the bottom left. This is the wise son. You remember I mentioned the 4 sons earlier, the wise one, the wicked one, the simple one, and the one who does not know how to ask. The first of those is the wise son, and look at how he looks here. Let's look more closely at him. This is the wise son in the Mantua Haggadah. Look at the similarity between this and Michelangelo's Jeremiah on the Sistine Chapel. It's almost as if our artist, our printer, our woodcutter. These would have been made out of usually woodcuts, which were then added to the printing press. It's almost as if our artist, I have to assume he had visited the Sistine Chapel. 50 years later, takes the image of Jeremiah, which he obviously had only in his head. It's not like he took a photo of the Sistine Chapel and had it with him, right? Or maybe he drew it out when he was there. And he took Michelangelo's Jeremiah, absolutely remarkable piece of art from the 16th century, the whole room, obviously, for those of you who have been, and he uses it in the Mantua Haggadah. How do we know that's Jeremiah, by the way? Because it actually says so on the Sistine Chapel, if I pull the lens out just a little bit. Jewish texts, Christian surprises, they are everywhere when you begin to explore the centuries-long history of these Passover Haggadah manuscripts. Thank you very much.
Gary, thank you. That was absolutely amazing. And I mean, so informative, so enjoyable. I mean, really absolutely wonderful. So Gary has very generously said that, you know, very happy to do Q&A. And I know we're almost at 7, but Gary says he doesn't mind if we overrun a bit. Chaim, your hand was up first. Do you want to start? My question, if I may, I think everybody else, I think I've given everyone a chance. Can I just return, I think it was the Prado Haggadah, which was unfinished, was the one where you had 3 letters. Right. Can we imagine that the money just ran out? I mean, it's a bit basic, but that's jolly expensive. I'm just thinking of the colors they use, the gold they use. And I can just imagine that something is commissioned and that maybe it was, you know, kind of, and it took a long time to make. I can almost imagine somehow you can give it to the person who commissions it for use at Seder night and then go back. I don't know. Is that completely ridiculous or is it a possibility?
I had never, honestly, I'd never thought of that option, but you know, it's very, very possible. We should say something about the cost.
It's huge.
Huge. Now, I alluded to the Cervera Bible written in Cervera, northern Spain, now in Lisbon in the National Library of Portugal. The fortunate thing about the Cervera Bible, written in the year precisely 1300, by the way, is that the colophon not only gives us the date of completion, but it gives us the date of when the scribes started. And the importance of that is that it allows us to calculate how long it took to write a 450 folio, that is the 900 pages as we would count today, manuscript. And it turns out that it took about 2/3 of a year. Yeah. I did the calculations. I subtracted Jewish festivals, Passover, Sukkot, Shabbat, etc., when the scribe wouldn't have been working. And it turns out he produced 2 folios a day, and that includes artwork. So the Haggadah text is much shorter. You know, we're talking 50 folios, some 60 folios, 90 folios, 100 folios, whatever it might be. So that doesn't take that long. But you would, the benefactor, the person for whom this was created, would have had to pay a single person's salary for, let's say, 2 months to get one of these produced, maybe 3 months, 2 to 3 months, not to mention the parchment, the ink, the gilding, the colors, the hues. We are talking about an enormous amount of work. So yes, it is not impossible that the money could have run out. He's got the text, you can still use it, but sorry, you know, the installment plan doesn't work.
Yeah, or maybe the person who commissioned it, he might have, she, it might even be a woman, might have died.
Possibly, anything's possible.
The heirs couldn't pay for it. There are many possibilities. Yeah. Anyway, I think everyone will want to join me to thank Gary again for an absolutely amazing, you can hear my claps, absolutely amazing talk, which has been, completely enjoyable, wonderful. I've made lots of notes for my own Seder to entertain my guests, my family. And so it remains to me to wish all of those who are celebrating Passover, Hag Sameach, and those who are in Holy Week to have a good week and a wonderful Easter. I think that, unless Taya, you want to say anything more, I think that means good afternoon, good morning, good night, good evening, wherever we are. And thank you very much for coming. And again, thank you, Gary, for an absolutely
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Anna.